noise. I'm in Jerusalem here, outside the station. So the first lamer for all the following of Klal Yisrael, may they have a speedy recovery.
Amen.
So I've got something which one second, sorry, I took a picture of. I scanned a page. 1 second, sorry about this. Okay, so I found something.
Okay.
Hold on. Oh, there we go. Taking a bit of time. Okay, so I found something from the book of the Garden of Emunah by Rav Shalom Arush, which is basically a book about believing that everything is for the best, and even if something doesn't go our way, we need to see the good in it as part of the big picture. So it says here, the chapter, I'm going to read it for a minute or two. It says the chapter, Unhappy Jew. So it says here, I'm going to summarize it. You can get somebody who learns all day, observes kashrut, does every single mitzvah, but is unhappy and negative. And it says here, nothing goes my way. What's going on here? So it says here in Tractate Shabbos that people need to correct their ways, and that wouldn't cause such sadness in their life. And if people are sad, what he says, and I mean this is a very, very high level to aspire to. People are sad, it means they don't have proper emunah. This is what because you're not accepting the way things are and the way that things are meant to be. And if we can, we should ideally be on the level where maybe things are for our own benefit. Whatever the reason is, we have to just accept certain things and that they're part of the big picture. I know, not easier said than done. So that's what he says. But people mustn't be unhappy if possible, not to be unhappy and sad all the time and negative. Yeah, that's what he says, because then that depicts the lack of emunah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well
Thanks. That's
a lovely
sorry.
message. No, Kevin was about to say the same thing. Kevin, that was lovely.
I was going to say that and add something. I was going to say absolutely lovely. I was going to add something. It's not that, not to add. It's just something that always confused me. Maybe Damon knows, one of you guys know. Is going to the Rambam Trust for a loan, is that lack of emunah?
No.
Why not?
Well, why would it be an obligation to set it up halachically? If you look at why it was called the Rambam Trust, it's ordered that Jews can set up financial independence so they don't need to rely on charity. The very essence of it is according to the Rambam's highest level.
Yeah, so maybe if you go to the Rambam Trust and if you go to a normal bank.
What's wrong with going to a normal bank?
I mean, are you not trusting Hashem that you're going to get enough money in to do whatever you want to do?
Well, I think not to live above your means is a completely separate conversation. But if there's a mechanism where, what
no, but I know people that go to the Rambam Trust to actually take loans to survive.
Okay, well that's.
Well, they go to banks. So those are the ones I'm talking about. Those that's not living above your means. They're trying to live within them. They're trying to survive.
Yeah.
That's quite tricky. That one. I'm sorry. I'm just saying it's not an easy answer.
No. But you added context now. I didn't have a context before. It's a good point.
I didn't. I wasn't clear. I meant when they take loans to survive, not for anything else. All right.
Thank God, from the grace of God, may none of us ever have to panic like that and think unclearly. Really, Gavin, it's a good point. It's a good point.
Yeah, it's scary. It's scary. All right. Sorry, continue. Sorry, I took up some time.
Okay, Damon, I'm going to go and sound because I'm going to hop onto a bus shortly. So.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for letting me start. Yeah. Thank you.
Well. All right. So, guys, before we start with the Gemara share, I thought, since it's always an upheaval thing, maybe every day we could start with a joke or end on a joke. I don't know if what you prefer. Okay, so in the 65th daf, the 106th daf, it was taught if a custodian swore falsely and the deposit was stolen, and witnesses testified that he himself stole it, and he also confessed his guilt, he's liable only to the careful payment but not to the one for surcharge, despite his confession to having made a false monetary oath. So the Gemara starts an inquiry about the specifics of the exemption of the one for surcharge, and we learned quickly about Rav Yaakov, that he said that if there's a careful payment and a 1/5, the 1/5 is incorporated in the careful. Not everybody has that opinion, although it's a completely legitimate opinion by many. Bava Kamma inquired, is the precise reason for the exemption that any money which makes one liable to the careful payment exempts him from the 1/5 surcharge for that same money? So his emphasis is on the money aspect. Or perhaps the precise reason for this is that any oath which makes one liable to the careful payment exempts him from the 1/5 surcharge for the oath. In other words, guys, and you'll see why I'm summarizing this, because the next case builds on this, and you guys might not have remembered it from yesterday, the bottom principle. So when the Torah teaches that one can't be held liable to both the twofold payment and the 1/5 surcharge simultaneously within a single case, does it mean that dual charges can't be incurred for denial of the same money, or that charges can't be incurred for the same false oath? Okay. Gemara explains that the question bears on a case where the defendant made two false oaths in denial of the same money. So does the exemption apply because there was only one claim, or does it not apply because there were two oaths? Okay. So what we are saying is, what's the case? When unpaid custodian claimed a claim of theft by a thief and swore to this effect, and later claimed a claim of loss and swore to that effect. Okay. And witnesses came and testified regarding the first oath that it was false, and then he admitted regarding the second oath that it was false. So in other words, the first case where witnesses came against him triggered a careful payment, and the second oath, which he in fact confessed was a false, triggered the one for surcharge and the asham offering. So we want to know, what's the law? Is he liable to the one for surcharge on account of the second oath, in addition to the careful payment on account of the first oath, or not? In other words, do we say that any money which makes one liable to the careful payment exempts him from paying the one for surcharge for the same money? And anyway, regarding this money that the custodian denied, he already became liable to the careful payment over it through his first oath. So he can't also become liable to the one for surcharge over the second oath. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way is, or perhaps we say that an oath which makes one liable to the careful payment is that very thing that exempts him from paying the one for surcharge for that same oath. So if the defendant would confess that his first oath was false, he couldn't be held liable to the one for surcharge for that oath, since he's already liable to a careful on account of it. But as for this latter oath, since he didn't make him liable to the careful because he admitted of his own volition that he lied, it'll make him liable to the one for surcharge, despite the fact that it concerns the same money as the first oath. It's a question. In other words, Rav Bava Kamma inquired specifically about a case in which a witness testified basically about the falsity of the first oath, that the deposit was stolen, and the defendant confessed to the falsity of the second oath, that the deposit was lost through an unavoidable mishap. So the only possible basis for exempting him from the surcharge for the second oath is he already involved himself with liability for the careful of the first. If we switch it around, guys, and we say that he first swore that the deposit was lost, and then he ultimately confessed, and then he swore that it was stolen, and then he was ultimately contradicted by witnesses, it's obviously clear then that he can't be held liable for careful for the second oath, because he already discharged his obligation towards the owner with the first oath. Okay? So the Gemara resolves the inquiry. How did it resolve it yesterday? Rava said, come learn the resolution from the following brisa. If a man said to one in the marketplace, where's my ox that you stole? And he said in reply, I didn't steal it. And the owner says, I adjure you to that your response is true. And he says, Amen. And afterwards, witnesses testify against him that they saw him steal it, pays the careful payment, the twofold payment. But if witnesses did not come in, he admitted on his own that he had sworn falsely, pays the principal, and the one for surcharge, and brings an asham offering. Now, here, guys, in the latter case, if witnesses had come prior to his admission, it is the witnesses who have made him liable to the twofold payment. Why? By dint of their testimony about the theft itself, even if there was no false oath, because here we're not dealing with the custodian. We extrapolate the laws of a custodian from the laws of a thief. Anyway, the brisa nevertheless states that if he admitted it on his own without witnesses having come, yeah, he's liable to pay the one for surcharge. But it implies from that statement that if he admitted to having sworn falsely after witnesses testified that he stole, he's not liable to pay the one for surcharge, even if he confesses. So the Gemara says, if it should enter your mind that only an oath, which makes one liable to the careful payment that exempts him from paying the one for surcharge for that same oath, but a defendant can become liable to both careful and 1/5 over the same money, then why, and this is important, guys, then why, when he admits after the witnesses testify, does he not pay the one for surcharge? So let's see. The oath that he declared didn't make him liable to the careful payment, since it was the witness's testimony about the theft itself that made him liable to it. So let the oath therefore make him liable to the one for surcharge, the Gemara is suggesting. Rather, do you not learn from this that it's the money which makes one liable to the careful payment, and that exempts him from the one for surcharge for that money? And the Gemara concludes, indeed, you need to learn from it. So all we are saying is that the dual charges of the careful and the one for surcharge can never be incurred over the same money, even in a case where there's a separate oath. That is the bottom line. That is the bottom line. All right, now it's going to lead in our second case. Oath doesn't make sense to you, just not. I'm not going to catch you with questions. It doesn't. Why not? Mate? I seem to have lost it.
Very noticeable. I can't
What?
really hear. I mean, I can hear, but it's like, because I got these headphones on that pick up the sound. I can hear everything and you. It's loud. Sorry, man. I'm trying to hear, but it's noisy like hell.
Oh,
You can hear it.
All right, well, listen, always what we can do afterwards is, you're a bright guy, we can do one-on-one for 10 minutes and I'll give you all the concepts. I appreciate you just staying on for moral support.
No, I can hear you fine now. It's somehow cleared up. I don't know what it was.
Listen, we actually all bright, Damon. So why can't you give us a 1-on-3 in 10 minutes as well every day?
You see, because there are 3 of you, so it takes 10 minutes to give it to each of you over, and then another 10 minutes to...
No, Dave, you don't understand. It will be 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 instead of 40 minutes. Even shorter for you. And, you know.
Yeah, that's good. I tell you what, the day you can give it over to me exactly, the day I can whack it up in 10 minutes, I'm happy. All right, so guys, we learned this, that just basically it has nothing to do with the fact that there's separate oaths. That won't incriminate you to a careful separately for one oath and a one for surcharge for another oath, Gavin. All we are saying is when you're arguing over the same amount of money, you can't have dual charges of careful and 1/5. That's all we're saying. That's it. And let's get on the next case. So, guys, having concluded that the careful payment and the one for surcharge cannot both be imposed over the same sum of money, the Gemara starts a further inquiry. Ravina inquired if the one for surcharge and the careful payment for the same sum of money are incurred by 2 people, what is the law? All right, do you see how the question changes?
I don't really understand the question. You're saying that that there's 2 people involved in the same in the same payment, or In two people, are they partners in this or what?
Okay, I'll explain it to you, but you understand the previous statement. Because we weren't sure if you had two separate oaths, Gavin. And in the one oath, you were basically caught out by witnesses at which would trigger kefil. And the other oath you admitted to, at which would trigger the one for surcharge and the asham because you wanted atonement. We don't know if there were two separate oaths over the same amount of money. If you could, in that case, pay a kefil and one for surcharge. And we learned that you can't because it's not about the amount of oaths. It's about dealing with the same amount of money. And that precludes separate payments for kefil and surcharge. And the surcharge is within the kefil for the same amount.
And the asham, no, I did actually understand that, but thanks. It was good to hear that again. But it did
enforce and clear it up,
yeah. It reinforced it. And that's what I needed. But listen, I want to ask you something as well. The asham offering, that's unrelated. It doesn't matter what order, it doesn't matter. As soon as you make a tshuva, that's when the asham kicks in, correct? Regardless of how it came about. It doesn't matter what order, it doesn't matter when, anything.
Correct. There is a proviso. You cannot give the asham offering unless you paid the principal and the one for surcharge.
Okay, because you can't get the tshuva otherwise, because you haven't paid.
Correct. That's exactly it.
Unless you paid, you got to do more than you say. So when you pay, then you're doing more than you say.
My friend, if you and I had a rand for every time somebody said they'd do something and they didn't do it, we would both be richer than Elon Musk. I promise you, there's no issue there. So now
I would buy SpaceX.
So now we're dealing with a complication in a case. We're saying, well, maybe there's such a thing as a kefil and a one for surcharge if two different thieves are involved in the case. I'm going to give you the case now. So Ravina is basically saying, look, if there's a one for surcharge and there's a kefil payment for the same sum of money, it might be the same sum of money. And we worked out if it's two different oaths by one person, you can't have the duality of it. But what if it's incurred by two different people? In other words, one person is incurred to pay the kefil and the other person the one fit. So Gavin asked a great question. What is the case? So Kevin, the case is as follows. Is where one is entrusted his ox to two people for safekeeping as unpaid custodians. And they together claim that it was stolen, when in fact they actually conspired and stole it themselves. And one of them swore falsely and afterwards admitted his guilt because he felt lousy and he wanted it to shiver, whereas the other one swore falsely and denied everything emphatically, and witnesses came and testified to his guilt. So, guys, the first one ought to be liable to the one for surcharge because he wanted it to shiver. And the second is liable to the kefil payment because he's in flat denial and witnesses checkmated him into the fact that he was caught red-handed. So we want to know, what is the law? And this is the important part. Do we say that with respect to one person, the merciful one, being Hashem, was particular that he should not pay both the one for surcharge and the kefil payment over the same principle? Okay? Or but we don't know the law with respect to two people. That's what we're saying. It could be in that particular case that if it was two people, this is what the Gemara is saying, the one pays kefil and the other one pays one for surcharge. Or perhaps if it's over one single sum of money, that the merciful one was particular, that the one for surcharge and the kefil payment just go issues. Number one, there's a rule that if it's one person for the same amount of money, you can't have a kefil and one for surcharge. If it's more than one person, maybe if the one lied and the other and witnesses came against him, there's kefil for the one, and for the other person that confessed, there is the one for surcharge. That's option one. Option two is Hashem, in his the merciful one was particular that if you're dealing with the same sum of money, that the one for surcharge and the kefil payment is not allowed to be paid in any circumstances. It doesn't matter if it's one person or it doesn't matter if it's two people. It's one sum of money. And therefore, the merciful one excluded this. So the Gemara offers no resolution and concludes, let it stand unresolved. We don't know. We don't know. There is, by the way, the Rambam comes out with the, there's a two Choshen Mishpat and the Rambam, Maimonides, that come out, I think, with the Halacha eventually, because you had to determine it. But I think on a Tanaic level, it remained unresolved. I'm sure they had to resolve it in some manner. All right. Gav, very clear. Kev, very clear. It's clear, right?
Yeah.
Can you, Kevin, explain to me that last concept about two people? Just so I know you've got it. And then we go on to the next thing.
Kevin's on a bus. Huh?
Oh, sorry, Kevin, you're on a bus. Apologies. You looked slick there. I don't know. He was looking like he was in an office. I didn't realize. It's on a bus.
No,
Right.
he's got a mask on and everything. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just, yeah. So that's what Kevin would look like as a dentist.
Or a surgeon or a doctor.
Or a surgeon without the cap, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But it's never black, but that's how you would look. Yeah, it's always
it's never black. It's white. With a minute, it's medical.
White or blue.
Kevin, you actually, I saw a picture of you when you were younger. Incidentally, you haven't aged, but just so you know.
So we lose Kevin there? No, he's still there.
No.
Yeah.
It's just interesting that. Anyway, let's get back to the Gemara share. So there's another inquiry.
Say again?
I said you haven't aged.
Damon, can you just go back like 30 seconds? Thank you. But can you just go back 1 minute? Just repeat what you said. I typed in the
I
chat.
said I saw an old picture of you and you haven't aged.
Before that. Oh, okay, thank you. I have. Yeah. Hopefully I've wiser.
Okay, before that, did you understand this concept that was regarding two people? The Gemara, did you understand the concept of it?
Just repeat, please.
All right. So all we are saying, Kevin, is that we know if it's one person, doesn't matter if they're two false oaths and one was contradicted by witnesses at which he's liable to kefil, and the other one he admitted in a different court, and by his own admittance afterwards he felt guilty and he's liable to the one for surcharge. He doesn't pay both. The kefil, he only pays kefil, Kabb, and the principal. That's within the kefil, so he's covered. Now, we know that with one person, and it's not because of the fact that they're two separate oaths, because we thought if there were two separate oaths, Kevin, might mean he has to pay both the kefil and the one for surcharge. The reason he doesn't, it's over one sum of money. So the next question of the Gemara is what happens if you have two thieves? They conspire. They're not thieves. They're actually custodians who become thieves. They conspire to keep the deposit, and they both swear falsely that it was stolen from a person. Now, the one was contradicted by witnesses, and therefore he owes the kefil, and the other one, before witnesses came, felt bad and admitted to swearing falsely, and therefore is liable to the one for surcharge. So do we say that because it's two separate people, even though it's the same sum of money, one can be liable for the kefil and one can be liable for the one for surcharge, because we know with one person can't be? Or do we say that Hashem, the merciful one, made a blanket rule that if you're dealing with one sum of money, it doesn't matter if it's one person or two, there's only the kefil payment. You don't pay this one for surcharge. And the Gemara basically says that the issue is unresolved. Okay, that's it. Let's go to the next part quickly. Pretty straightforward. The Gemara presents another inquiry regarding two payments over one sum of money. Rav Papa inquired regarding two one-fifth surcharges for the same money, or two kefil payments for the same money incurred by one person. What is the law? I'm going to explain the rationale now. So the Gemara says, what's the case? It's a case where an unpaid custodian claimed a claim of loss and swore to that effect, felt bad afterwards, admitted his guilt, and later again claimed a claim of loss and swore to that effect and admitted his guilt. Now, is the guy insane, you want to know? He's not insane. What he did do is that he felt bad. His first claim was one of loss, and he then just didn't do what he was supposed to do, as Gavin said, and take action and pay. He felt bad about lying, admitted it, never paid. Then he was sued again. He claimed that it was stolen from him, and at the end of the day, said felt bad afterwards and admitted it, and maybe paid the second time. But at that point, whether or not he paid the second time or not, the court then takes away one's free choice. They might attach assets. You know, the first time they let you do your own thing and do right. Why? Because if you admitted to it, it means you want teshuva. What's going to trigger teshuva is actually taking action and paying the principal, the one for surcharge and asham. So we want to know, as far as that's concerned, he only ought to have occurred 2 charges of the one for surcharge for 2 false oaths. So that's case number 1. Case number 2, he claimed a claim of theft by a thief and swore to that effect, and witnesses came and testified that he'd stolen it himself. Okay? Fine, so he had to pay it. But he didn't pay it. And later he was sued again and claimed that it was stolen from him in a different court, maybe a different city. And guess what? The plaintiff got those witnesses to come to the different city and say, hang on, this occurred before, and he'd stolen it himself. So in that second case, he ought to have incurred 2 careful payments. Why? Because there are 2 double payment penalties, because the false claim were contradicted by witnesses in both cases, in 2 different courts. So, do we say that the merciful one meant to say that 2 different types of monetary assessments, meaning the one is a one for surcharge for teshuva, for asham, and the kefil is when there's no, what do you call it? There's no admittance, but witnesses came against him. And since you're dealing with either 2 one for surcharges in the first case or 2 careful payments in the second case, it's not a crossbreeding of monetary assessments. It's the same type of monetary assessments. So do we say that that should not be paid over one principal sum of money? In other words, you can't trigger 2 kefils if it's the same sum of money, or 2 1/5 because it's the same sum of money. That's the one question. Because it's one type of assessment that would be paid twice. So is the exemption inapplicable? Or perhaps the merciful one meant to say that 2 additional monetary assessments of any sort should not be paid over one principal sum of money. And here too, there are 2 monetary assessments. Okay? So all we are saying is it different when you've got a kefil and a 1/5 compared to 2 1/5 or 2 kefils? In other words, if it's the same amount of money, can you trigger a double payment, or can you not? So we've resolved this inquiry before, guys. I'll give you a clue. We learned the resolution from whom? Rava. Do you remember he said the Torah states with respect to one for surcharge, and its fifth shall he add to it? Do you remember that was from Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 5, verse 24? You remember that? In other words, we're talking about a guy, he said he can lie up to 5 times or more or whatever, and every time he lies, he's subject to the one for surcharge, but it's 1/5 of the 1/5. Do you remember, guys? Keeps getting 1/5 of the 1/5. So what does that prove? Is that the Torah indicates numerous fifths with respect to one principle. And then if that's the case, you can learn and extrapolate from that you can have numerous kefils for one amount. But you can't have a kefil and a one for surcharge. But you can have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever kefil payments, and the same with 1/5. But they have to be the same type of payment. There can't be 2 different forms of assessments. Okay, we can end on that note. I know there's 7 minutes, but Kevin needs to go, and I'm quite happy Guys,
No, Damon, carry on. It's fine.
okay. Okay. So you know what? You know what? I'm okay to end at this point because Arthur can't hear us that well. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, because I don't want to go. I don't want to go into a whole new. I don't want to go into a whole new concept. Does that make sense?
Yes, Damon, I can give you a bit quiet here.